The case that we will be discussing today is full of conspiracies, mysteries, also cover-ups from the authorities, so I'm pretty sure that you're gonna like it. Moreover, if you know JFK assassination, then this case in Sweden is compared to Sweden's JFK assassination case. I know that you are hooked already, so I will not dive into any long introductions because we have a lot to cover, so let's just jump into the story. Now, if I mention JFK assassination, you have already probably understood that we're going to talk about an assassination of a very influential politician. And yes, in Sweden, there was this case of killing prime minister in the middle of a street, and still this death, this murder in the middle of the street is surrounded by a lot of mysteries and still hasn't been fully, let's say, explained. And also, we don't really know who was the murderer, although there are many signs. Olof Palme, that's the name of the Sweden's prime minister, whose case we're going to cover in today's video. Before we dive into the assassination, let's look a little bit into his life. Who is Olof Palme? So Sven Olof Joachim Palme was born on January 30th, year 1927. He was born in a wealthy family with a history of public servants and politicians. He lived a privileged life. As I said, he was coming from a wealthy family. He was always surrounded by influential people, even some Swedish royals. He had talent for languages. At the age of 4, he spoke, of course, his native language, Swedish, and also Russian. He did very well at school. He was athletic and thrived in any kind of studies that he was picking up. In the year 1946, he moved to the US to enroll at Kenyon College. It has been suggested by several historians that Palme had one of his political awakenings during this time in post-war USA. Palme himself claimed that seeing the great class divisions in the United States at the time was one of the 3 decisive events that made him a social democrat. After finishing his studies in Kenyon College, he still traveled around the United States just to kind of experience the life of the ordinary people there. And after that, he decided to go back to Sweden and wanted to study law. In the year 1953, he started to be recognized. He was working at that time's Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister of that time was Tage Erlander, and he became his assistant. And he was thriving so much in this position that he became one of the most trusted Prime Minister's assistant at the office. He started to climb the political ladders from there on, and afterwards, in the year 1956, he married a psychologist, Lisbeth Beck-Friis, and in the year 1958, he was elected to the first chamber of the Social Democrats. Fast forward, because we don't want to go into those details. In the year 1967, he became Minister of Education, and in 2 years, he became the Prime Minister of Sweden, representing Sweden's Social Democrats. This leads us to the 70s. You have to understand that Palme, he had a big personality and he was very open about his opinions in regards to the events that were happening around the world. And this also is the key to the conspiracy theories that later on surrounded his death, but we will get to that. And by saying that he was open in his opinions, controversial opinions, opinions that probably nobody would dare to say. For example, he went to the United States, to the White House, and said that he's against the US's situation in Vietnam at that point. He also visited Kremlin, so whenever he saw some injustice, he would comment on it. So he was that kind of person that was not really comfortable to everyone. What is more, Palme was also very invested in situations in third world countries. He had personal contacts with people like Castro, Ortega, and Arafat, and these political relationships were not very much welcomed by the representatives of other parties in Sweden. What I'm pointing out with this is that he had a lot of supporters because he was so brave. And in the meantime, with his actions, he also gained a lot of enemies. In addition, Palme also had a very charismatic personality, which drew a lot of like ordinary people towards him, and he actually welcomed them very well. You're gonna see that he was not having like guards. He would go like a normal person, like an ordinary person on the street, and if somebody wanted to talk to him, he would not refuse. He would actually have a conversation with those people. He had very open speeches, as I said, about the things where he was condemning things happening in the world. And as we already established, this is why he got also a lot of enemies. And after his assassination, even CIA and KGB were like on their tiptoes because they were a little bit confused what's happening. Maybe they also knew, and that's why they went like freaking out. Because some of the conspiracies after his death involved theories that his assassination is related to Kurds, also to Iranian secret police, and also to some leaders of apartheid in South Africa. So like a lot of conspiracies around that, but in my opinion, the case can be solved a lot easier, and we're gonna see what points out to that. So just stick around. Now, despite all of this colorful bouquet of possible conspiracies who killed Olof Palme, still at the end, the investigators decided to put all of the blame on a person who was basically like a junkie who was not even involved in the politics, and said like, yeah, he did it. And everyone was like, what the yeah, so let's dive in and let's see what really happened there. It was February 28th, year 1986 when all of this happened. So it was an ordinary Friday pre-weekend. Palme was described as having very good spirits because he finally took like a weekend off for him and his wife to have some fun. This is something that a prime minister would have rarely, so this is why he was so happy about this Friday night. So at 5:30 p.m. he returns back to his home at Gamlestan in the old city of Stockholm. And as I already mentioned, Palme was a people's man. He would never had bodyguards, and he would just like randomly walk the streets, and if there were people who wanted to approach him, he didn't refuse because he wanted to stay close to the people of Sweden. He was very clear that if he would have a bodyguard, that would create some kind of wall between him and the people of Sweden, and he didn't want them to feel awkward. He wanted to stay available to the people of Sweden. Palme didn't want to change his daily life, even after becoming the prime minister. He wanted to live a normal life outside the office, just like the rest of the Sweden's population. And I guess that was one of the reasons why Swedish people really loved him, that he was like just like one of them. Anyways, back to the story of that night. Suddenly, Palme and his wife decides to go to the cinema. So at 8:30 p.m., they leave their house and they're heading towards metro station. As I said, no bodyguards. He wants to stay close to the people. He's even using the public transport. And this is when a series of weird encounters start in that area. Once Palme goes out, a lot of people start to witness some shady people in the area. For example, around 20 meters away from where Palmes were going towards the metro, a lady came forward saying that she was passing a street and then suddenly she saw some men lurking in the dark shadows of the little streets, and he was talking to something as if that person had some kind of walkie-talkies. She felt it weird because why would somebody do that? sitting in the shadows and like talking into a walkie-talkie, but like, yeah, she just noted and like continued about her walk during that night. And this lady was not the only one who noticed some strangers walking around with walkie-talkies exactly in the areas where Palmes were walking around. So some people even said that they saw some men like hiding, that they are talking in walkie-talkies in the metro station, exactly in the station where Palmes were about to go into the train. The man who sold tickets to Palmes for Metro Drive, he said that he noticed something peculiar. After they had purchased the tickets, he noticed that there was a guy who immediately followed them when they went towards the station. And afterwards, also the metro driver recalling that there were two men who followed Palmes immediately into the train of the metro. The cinema where Palmes were heading towards was located between the second and third metro station. Namely, they could go out on the second station and go a little bit further, or they could step out in the third station and go a little bit backwards to the cinema. And people who were waiting for the metro on the second stop said that they also noticed some strange people walking around with walkie-talkies there. However, Palmes decided to step out on the third stop and go a little bit backwards towards the cinema. And the metro driver, who saw two men immediately following them when they stepped into the wagon, said that those guys stepped immediately out when Palmes went out of the wagon. The movie ended at 11:10 p.m. Palmes decided that they're not gonna go home by metro, but that they're gonna have some fresh air and walk home. It wasn't that far. Another interesting thing is that one witness saw that nearby the cinema there was a weird police car standing. She noticed it because the policemen were not using the usual police equipment, but they used some random walkie-talkies. And since she felt that this looks pretty strange, she decided to write down the car's number. Unfortunately, she remembered later only the last three numbers, which was 520. But she recalled that the policemen in the walkie-talkies were saying, okay, on this side then. And then they went on somewhere, wherever, I don't know, maybe following Palmes. It was 11:17 p.m. already. Palmes were walking home. This was seen by another eyewitness, let's call him John. He was just like walking past them with his girlfriend. But this eyewitness also spotted something. Across the street nearby the cemetery, he noticed a guy that he recognized as the local policeman, whose name was Thomas Lind. So he was like across the street, just weirdly lurking when Prime Minister is passing by on the opposite side of the street. And this witness that I called John also noticed that Lind actually had a walkie-talkie that he was talking into. So a minute passes and Palmes crossed the street because his wife, Lisbeth, suddenly notices something in one of the shop's windows and she just wants to get closer to see that thing, which is like pretty normal for women to do, right? Just around 200 meters away from this, another eyewitness whose name was Christian, he notices another two strange men standing by an empty shop, in front of an empty shop, and both of them also have walkie-talkies, and they look quite suspicious to an extent that Christian felt even scared to pass them. Like, it's so late at night, two shady men standing there with walkie-talkies, like looking pretty creepy. So he was scared to an extent that when he went home, he even called the police and reported seeing both of these guys standing in front of this empty shop. What Christian didn't know is that one of these men that he reported in front of the shop was actually a police officer. And strangely enough, after making this report about seeing them, he started to receive strange calls to his home phone. 11:20 p.m. Palmes continued their walk home, and unfortunately, these are the last minutes when Olof Palme was actually alive. Palme and his wife reach a corner where there is a paint store. And in front of the entrance door of this paint store, there is a man awaiting for them. The clock shows 11:21 p.m. and Palme passes this man with his wife being slightly ahead of him. The man steps out of the shadow and makes 2 gunshots. He is shot from a close range and dies instantly. Josta Söderström was a police officer at that time, and his police car was actually not so far where this event took place. And he remembers that once he arrived there, that there were around like 10 or so people surrounding Olof Palme after this happened. And all of them were panicking and attempting to revive their prime minister, like giving mouth-to-mouth or cardiac massages. So one of the people who was attempting to revive the prime minister noticed that Josta is approaching, a policeman is approaching, and shouted, he went that way, and was like showing the direction where the shooter ran away. And apparently the shooter had run like 80 or so steps, there was like a stair, and ended up in another street. And one of the witnesses actually followed the shooter up to that place, but then he lost the trace in a street called David Bagares Gate. What is the most strangest thing about how this witness lost the trace of the shooter is that the street where he lost the trace of the shooter was actually totally deserted. Like, it seemed like the shooter had like disappeared in thin air. So he was like standing there and looking around like empty street, and where is this guy? And then suddenly he was blinded by some lights of a car approaching, and that car was a police's car, and it just like slowly passed him, like, and that's it. So yeah, I know what you're thinking, but just keep listening. Now, this witness who was chasing after this shooter and who lost the trace and then was blinded and passed by this weird police car also had like a bad gut feeling. So when the car passed him, he decided to like note in his head the car's number plate. And again, the number plate ended with 520. Remember? This is not the first time when we encounter this police car in this case. Now, this witness again, who noted the police car's number and was like running after this shooter, was very brave. He actually stopped the police car and he approached the policeman inside it and said that you should probably be chasing a guy who just killed the prime minister, or at least attempted to kill prime minister. And the policemen seemed very chill, and they were like, yes, we know. We're on it, and then just drove away. Later, this car was recognized as a police car whose number was 1520, and it was recognized because this car was actually standing under the windows of another witness who were telling about the oddities happening in that area when Palme was murdered. But yeah, like, this didn't went any further. You're gonna see this tendency throughout the case. So one of the Swedish press photographers, whose name was Åke Malmström, he was on duty on that night. So basically he sits in a car, he catches the waves of communications between the police so that he hears where something is happening, so that he's first there to take some pictures, to put them on the news or newspapers. And like while he's on the waves, like listening to the police reports and alerts, he suddenly comes across this like wave where he catches some discussions made on walkie-talkies. And this conversation is pretty weird. Malme, in an interview in a documentary, tried to recall what was this conversation that he heard on these waves. I quote, "I heard this conversation. Hello up there, how are you doing?" And someone then replied, "It's cold." Then the first voice continued, "The prime minister has been killed." Then there was nothing, not a sound. So this makes us conclude very obvious. The men with the walkie-talkies definitely were involved in Palme's assassination. I mean, there were dozens of them spotted in the area where Palme and his wife were walking around. And what is more, the conversation that the photographer heard, we still up to nowadays don't know where was this conversation happening and who was talking there. At 11:25 p.m., around 500 meters from where the Prime Minister's dead body lies, a bus number 43 approaches a bus stop, and this bus stop is called Eriksbergsgaten. People report seeing two men, visibly out of breath and anxious, standing there on this bus stop and stepping on this bus. Since both of the men acted quite odd, the faces of these men were remembered by the bus driver and also the two passengers that were on the bus. And later on, they were recognized as da-da-da-da, Thomas Lind, and the other guy was Nils Horn. If you have forgotten, Lind was that policeman who was actually standing across the street by the cemetery looking at Palmes when they were walking home, and Lind was recognized by another witness who saw him. So kind of shady things, right? The fact that Lind was together with Horn was nothing unusual since they worked together. They were actually police officers who dealt with minor crimes. And what is more, both of them were part of like a group that they have created, and they called themselves Baseball League. It is interesting to know, though, about this like squad, the Baseball League, that the members were linked to extreme right, which is the opposition of Palme, because he's like social democrat. And both of these men, during their duty, were known to be very aggressive, using unnecessary force during their duty, but all of this was never really like going further. It was all always covered up. Ole Minel, a Swedish journalist who was actually doing a study on this baseball league and their activities, said that at one point their activities had become uncontrollable. The aggressiveness, the radical actions, and everything that they were doing within the police office itself in that area. So it was decided to break up this squad, and two groups of the police were created, A and B, and they basically like spread those guys into like different offices so that they don't control one, but they have a little bit of radicals, extremists in one group and a little bit in the other one, so that they don't take over the office, if you know what I mean. Norrmalm police station is the one that is actually the closest to the seat of the government. And it is known that several of these baseball league members actually worked in that particular office. That being said, you have to know that the majority of the police officers working in the police of Sweden were social democrats supporting Olof Palme. However, these extremists, as we already established, they were existent in many of these offices, although they were minority, but they were still like pursuing this like aggressiveness, and they were known to be the most brutal people in any of these stations. So this journalist who was like investigating the history of this baseball league, these extreme rights, said that they would actually create themselves special evenings where they would gather. They would call them friendship nights. There they would invite very extreme right lecturers who were very passionate about their ideas, so they would listen to those lectures, and afterwards they would have a entertainment by listening to German military music. And I guess by this you probably have already imagined that, yes, they were using the Hitler salute. And allegedly one of these friendship nights was also held immediately after Palme was shot to death. And allegedly they were drinking a toast to this happy event. The chief of Stockholm police office, his name was Hans Holmer, took charge of the investigation of Palme's murder. And the funny thing is that he was actually the creator of the baseball league, and he was very proud of it. And furthermore, Hans Holmer had automatic weapons in his possession, which is something that is legally forbidden in Sweden. So how did he manage to do this? And in addition to these like weapons that he owned, he also had an office that had bulletproof windows, which was something done without official permission from, let's say, higher authorities within the police hierarchy, so which was also illegal. So first of all, why? Second of all, like, how is he managing to buy these things and also be like chief of the Stockholm police? Now, it was known that Homer owned not only illegal weapons that he had illegally purchased, he also had purchased a lot of walkie-talkies just recently, and he had made this purchase from a man named PJ Karlstrom. So this Karlstrom, he was a former policeman. Of course, he was extreme right, because like I think Homer is surrounding himself with great minds like him. And after he left the police office, Karlstrom became an illegal weapons dealer. Now, this PJ Karlstrom is actually a very interesting person. He has been seen on different photos, again showing the Hitler salute, even in front of Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. And what is also interesting is that when they were investigating his storage of illegal things and weapons, they found some bullets that were the same caliber as the ones that were used to kill Olof Palme. Of course, it's just like a fact that he had that kind of bullets that he was also offering to sell. And interestingly enough, Karlstrom actually was in the hospital with appendicitis during the time when Palme was killed. But on the night when Palme was killed, he signed himself off of the hospital against the warnings of the doctors. Yeah, so what could he be doing on the same night when Palme was murdered? I guess you can make your own guesses, right? In some police documents about Karlstrom, he is characterized as cold, insensitive, and capable of murder. That just shows what kind of person he is. And what is more, Karlstrom's apartment was actually located on the same street where the shooter's trace disappeared after that shooter was chased by the eyewitness. And of course, Karlstrom doesn't have an alibi. He excused himself from the hospital, so where was he? And what is suspicious, or maybe not, because this investigation was led by the creator of a baseball league, there was never like an official police inquiry to investigate Karlstrom. Maybe because Karlstrom was giving Homer bullets, weapons, walkie-talkies and stuff. Yeah, now you know where is this going. And speaking about bullets, there was something weird about that. So as we recall, there were 2 shots made towards the prime minister. The first bullet was found immediately, but the second one, it took them like 37 hours to be found. However, this second bullet at the end, as it appears, was lying 4 meters away from the body. So why nobody saw it during those 37 hours? So, but once both of the bullets were found, they were of course taken by the police and put in this like special bag and sent to the lab. But by the time the bullets reached the lab, they were perfectly cleaned. When the assassination happened, people of course freaked out and tried to like find some help, call for some ER. One of the men that actually went to their car to take a phone, he had a phone in his car. His name was Leif Lundqvist, and he tried to reach ER and just, you know, make them come and save the prime minister. Maybe he can be saved. So what was weird that, you know, usually when you call ER, they respond quickly and they arrived as quickly as possible. But once like he reached the ER, he was put on hold for like 80 seconds. And then afterwards, when somebody finally picked up the phone, suddenly the line strangely went out. Now, I must not be the only one who feels like there was somebody supervising the line and making sure that this call for help doesn't really reach the ER. And if you're thinking like that, you're right. Because the communications center was supervised on that night by a man named Hans Zetterland. And this is actually interesting because that is not his usual position that he would usually take. He is actually a patrol policeman, and he's basically driving a police car in his ordinary workday. And now on that night, suddenly he is placed in the communication center, basically to be the man who is in charge of the lines and incoming calls and sending out the alerts to the police cars or ER machines. And I think you will not be surprised to learn that Hans Zetterman is actually also a part of baseball league, so he's a right extremist. When an emergency call comes usually to the communication center, that call is usually prioritized. Zetterland somehow decided that he's not gonna obey this rule. So as you remember, this witness called and was put on hold for 80 seconds. So what happened during that time? Well, as it appears, Zetterland decided that he's not going to prioritize this call from the murder scene. He's going to pick up a call and prioritize just a call from a random taxi driver. So he picks up, and this taxi driver actually reports that he saw the shooting of somebody, namely the Olof Palme shooting. Zetterland was not expecting that, so he just basically hangs up on the taxi driver at that point, which is like, in your face, Zetterland. People will still report. Now, this weird kind of routine that took place in the communication center was quite deeply investigated by two information technology specialists, brothers Kari and Pertti Poutiainen. And they really went quite deep into the situation to understand what really happened there in this communication center and why the conversations kept on being cutting off. And they went as far as going to meet Zetterland face to face and ask the questions about that night. They wanted some answers. He did not even call an ambulance, although he knew that a man had been shot down. He did not report the incident as the rules required. Equally, he didn't inform the superior officer in charge. So, in simple words, what actually happened is Zetterland made sure that the message about the shooting did not receive the ER. He wanted to delay the arrival of ER to the crime scene. And when the ER were questioned about why did they arrive so late to the scene, they were like literally puzzled because they said like, we received this information that we have to go to that place pretty late. So there is no question towards us. Like once we receive the message, we immediately go. So Zetterland actually, his plan worked out very well in that case. So one of the first known calls was made around 2 minutes after the police arrived at the crime scene. Of course, this went nowhere because Zetterland was in the communication center. And what is more interesting or weird is that even the police didn't bother to call ER from there. So, yeah, that's a little bit weird. When the case involves a firearm, which we already established is something illegal in Sweden, then this case has to be pushed as a priority, and there has to be like an alert sent out to all the police cars, and this alert should be repeated for several times so that the policemen know that they have to chase somebody who actually has a firearm. And can you believe this didn't happen? There was, though, an alert given out from the communication center by Zetterland, but it actually involved like recklessly driving Volvo car. So he put that one as a priority as opposed to a murder that has to be prioritized. So basically what he did, he sent out this alert about Palme's shooting, but it happened like with a lower importance level. And also it was not repeated because it was not put as the number one priority. And one of the information technology specialists who were like diving into this case of what happened in the communication center in an interview said, and I quote, "In this case, the alert was not repeated on the regular wavelength. In fact, it was only transmitted on the special frequency. Consequently, only those police patrols who had heard the first broadcast were aware of the situation. So the majority of the response force available in the city center were completely unaware of what had happened to their prime minister. And none of these divisions elsewhere in the city were alerted." From this, we can conclude that only few cars heard the alert that the prime minister has been shot. The rest of the cars didn't even know, which means that a lot of cars who could be involved in searching the shooter were not aware of this information, hence they were not even looking for a shooter. How convenient. Now, the policeman that I already mentioned, who was the first one who arrived at the scene, his name was Gösta Söderström. He came forward afterwards saying that all the information on the official reports about how the communication was made from the communication center and when the police actually arrived and what happened there afterwards was falsified. So the official documents about what happened during that night from the police were falsified and all the information of them was wrong. And I quote, "I can swear on the Bible that I arrived at 11:30 p.m., but according to the official version, I supposedly arrived at 11:23 p.m. This question has tormented me for years, and I'm able to prove what I'm saying. The official register is inaccurate." Now, let's talk a little bit about this so-called falsified official register. What kind of information it includes and what really happened. So firstly, we need to question, was Söderström really the first policeman who arrived at the scene or not? So a police car number 3230, according to the official report, was alerted about the event at 11:23 p.m. and arrived at the scene within seconds. But as we all know, Söderström says that he was the first one and he arrived there at 11:30 p.m. Like, he remembers that he arrived at 11:30. So if the official document says that the police arrived at 11:23, was that some kind of another policeman there before Söderström? And then when he arrived like 7 minutes ago afterwards, like that policeman had disappeared? Like, there is so many indiscrepancies. And another thing is that the radio communications report actually supports the fact that the first policeman who arrived at the scene is Gösta Söderström, which means that they imply that 11:23 p.m. that was Gösta who arrived there, but he arrived there at 11:30 because he remembers that he arrived and he wrote down that on his report, you know? So we're talking about 7 minutes from 11:23 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. So why was it so important? What can you do during 7 minutes? Oh my gosh, you can run away. You can shoot somebody and you can run away. You gain some time. And then, of course, there is your support team in the communication center who is also delaying the arrival of ER or whatever who can help. Gösta Söderström himself said that for many times he's been trying to point out to this mistake and like trying to appeal to official register to like correct the information, but every time he's rejected. And every time when he was like appealing to correct this official report, he was shown like a typewritten document saying that at 11:23 p.m., 14 patrol cars were informed about the crime. And we all know that this was totally not what really happened. And the control report listing the police action also looks very strange. So the original of this document, of course, conveniently has disappeared, but there are some copies still available in some places. And you can see that, yes, Zetterland has written down that at 11:23 p.m. he has sent out the police to the crime scene, which we also know that it's not correct. But you can also notice on that report that he had put, like, not he, but the system has put a little star by this time, 11:23 p.m. So what does this star mean? Does it change anything? Well, Josta explained what it means. So a policeman receives an alert message to go to the scene. He has to enter this alert in the system from his side. If there is a time gap of at least 7 minutes before when the alert has been sent out from controls and when the policeman enters it from his side, then the system automatically puts the star by the initials. In short, I think that this really proves that Josta really received the alert 7 minutes later than it is put on the record. And I believe that changes a lot. As I said, 7 minutes, you can do a lot. Now, let's go back a little bit to the witnesses, because there actually were some very important people who even saw the man standing in front of that paint shop who did shoot the prime minister. And what is weird that many of these witnesses who afterwards came forward in the police, two of them were like two girls who saw that man a little bit before he killed prime minister, were afterwards intimidated and put into fear so that they would keep their mouths shut. So two of these girls, they could recognize that shooter, and they afterwards just went on silent and never gave any interviews again because they were scared for their life. Now, before these two women, these two girls were intimidated to the extent that they would never talk about this ever. They did give one interview to one of the Swedish journalists, and his name was Ulla Olsen. And he has the information. He has the first source interview with these girls. So the story goes as follows. These two women were also attending a cinema and coming back home from cinema. And one of them had forgotten her watch, so she just wanted to know what time is it. And she approached this man who was standing in front of the paint shop to ask him about the time. What time is it? And funnily enough, she actually recognized this man. This man was actually Finnish, and she recognized him because he was a frequent guest in the gym where she was going, and like that gym was in the area where they lived. So when she asked about the time, he was literally trying to ignore her. And then she grabbed his hand and was like, "Why are you not answering me? It's so weird." But this Finnish guy just continued ignoring her. He was just like standing there with his arms crossed like this. And then she noticed that from the armpit, there is something that he's holding. And it was a walkie-talkie. And then she noticed that from the other armpit, there was also something lurking out. And this thing actually looked like a gun. And then suddenly from the other armpit with the walkie-talkie, there was a voice saying, "They're coming." The man replied to that message in Finnish saying, "I've been spotted. What shall I do?" And to this, the voice in the walkie-talkie said, "Bad luck. Continue as planned." Needless to say that both women literally freaked out and were like going as fast as possible away from that guy and that place. And when they had reached around 2 blocks away from there, they heard a gunshot. They got so freaked out that they went straight to the metro station and home. In the morning, when they woke up and switched on the radio, they heard that the prime minister has been killed. So, as I said, this woman recognized this guy as being that Finnish guy from the gym. And she kind of remembered him because he was very visible in that gym. He would be like a very loud guy. He would like form these friendships with other Finns who were also attending this gym, and they would talk loudly and make a lot of jokes. And she noted this because in most cases, these jokes were very racist, which just shows that he might be also extreme right. The woman insisted that many people in the gym knew him because he talked to many people and he was very visible, so it wouldn't be hard to recognize him and identify him and find him. But the police continued to insist that it is so hard to identify the shooter. Hans Overbro has been in charge of the investigation for 9 years. And at first, he announced that they wanted to know the motive of this murder. And then in an interview, he said that they had done a lot of work around this case and that no conspiracies are involved in that. And the indiscrepancies with the police that people were mentioning, he's saying no, that's not a conspiracy. And I quote, "There is always a public aversion to what the police do. All the accusations have no substance. They have nothing to do with reality." When he was asked about the falsification of the documents, that some of the policemen were pointing out that there is something wrong with those documents, he just randomly said in an interview that, well, my job is not to be suspicious of the police. My job is to arrest the killer. Basically, he's saying that I'm not going to investigate the police. I'm investigating the case. Which in this case seems like, dude, both of these things are totally linked. Oh, and remember Hans Holmer, one of the leading investigators? Also in this case, yeah, the guy with the bulletproof windows and the shotguns and who was buying walkie-talkies in bulk? Yep. So this Hans Holmer said that on the night in question, he was actually not in Stockholm. He was around 200 kilometers away from Stockholm, staying in a hotel called Scandic. And in the year 1990s, when some of the receptionists came forward saying that they are not allowed to say anything about this if they are approached about the questions if Hans Holmer had stayed in the hotel. Meaning this receptionist was again intimidated into fear, just like not to talk or else, right? So, but before this receptionist was put into fear to speak, there was a journalist who still managed to talk to that receptionist before they were put into this fear. First of all, this journalist, he did research on all of the hotels in that area where Hans Holmer said he was staying, and none of them had the records of him staying there on that night. That is the first red flag. And then he went specifically to that Scandic hotel where he said he was staying, and even there was no record of him staying there. So how did he prove that he was away from Stockholm? Well, everybody still considered this as a very valid alibi for Holmer. They were pushing forward this narrative that yes, his alibi is staying in that specific Scandic hotel. But the story didn't stick up. He would tell in his interviews that he would wake up in that hotel early in the morning, go down to the reception to ask for some hot water because he wanted to make some tea. And this is when the receptionist informs him that Olof Palme has been assassinated. This is how he basically learned about this. But he didn't calculate everything to perfection. Let me explain. So he said that he went down to the reception at 7:35 to get that hot water. But we all know, and the Scandic also confirms this, that from 7 there is the official breakfast, meaning people who want hot water come to reception for it before 7 because the breakfast has not started. But he said he came down at 7:35. That's the time when everybody who wants some tea or hot water just goes straight to the breakfast area, so they don't have to approach the receptionist. You know what I mean? Okay, but then Homer shows a bill from the hotel, which is kind of funny because all of the Scandic bills look the same, so this might have been picked up in some other hotel. That's first of all. And second of all, the signature of the receptionist is of someone who was not even on duty on that night. And what is more, there are some testimonies that Holmer actually on that night was in the police's headquarters. And one highly ranked police officer actually saw him on the street not so far from where Olof Palme was murdered. He recalled this specifically because like once he noticed him, he just like said hi to him and he tried to pretend as if he didn't hear or he didn't want to be seen, so he didn't reply to this greeting. And that is not all. There is something interesting also in relation to Holmer's personal driver. Yes. Do you remember Palme was walking on foot, taking a metro just to be closer to the Swedish people, but this guy, he has a driver, okay? Anyways, as it appears, this driver, his name was Rolf Dolgen. Before he became a driver to Holmer, he was a driver to very like prominent people in Sweden, like representatives, like highly ranked politicians and also representatives of Secret Service. And he himself, before becoming a driver, he was a commander of elite parachute commandos. So this guy, he had some skill and like he was interacting with highly ranked people. So Dahlgren died in the year 1994, but his widow, who was also working in the police force, remembered vividly what her husband was saying about that night in question. So first of all, she recalled that her husband was driving Holmer to the crime scene and that they arrived 7 minutes after the shooting, okay? And then the widow in an interview showed this book where Dahlgren was writing down all of his hours and where he was driving. And this Friday in question, when Palme was shot, you can see that it has been written down that he had been driving there, but that afterwards it had been like really rapidly like scratched out as if didn't happen, like he tried to cross it out from the book. Holmer, while he was still on the investigation, was pushing forward this theory of Kurdish direction. And here we also need to know a little bit of like background information. So Palme wanted to make Sweden a moral superpower. So he wanted to make Sweden very neutral and also to make it like a refuge place for foreign opposition activists. Sweden took in many Kurds and Palme publicly endorsed Kurdish independence. Many of the refugees were ordinary citizens, but some were militants with links to an organization that quickly became known for its violent struggle against the Turkish state. What Holmer was pushing forward was the fact that Palme was shot by some representatives of this like organization, this extreme organization of Kurds, because they were not satisfied with Swedish government, which really sounds like a total bullshit to me. And I'm not the only one who feels like that, because once he was asked more questions to explain about this like Kurdish theory, he couldn't really explain it. Things didn't stick together, like with the story of shooting Palme, and at the end Holmer had to resign from his investigator's position. Thank God. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, this crazy theory appears about this lonely killer who wanted to shoot the prime minister out of nowhere. So we will get to that by the end of this video, because you still need to have a scapegoat, right? Anyways, let's just go into another conspiracy of the politicians at that time, because I think it's very important and it gets even dirtier to an extent that it feels like mafia. So hold on. Now, Holmer has resigned. You might think that somebody will come and finally look into this case and also start looking into the police's activities, which really like in your face looks so suspicious. But no, nobody, I said nobody decided to look into this shady action that surrounded police on that night. Many people afterwards speculated that nobody was willing to dig deeper because this would show a lot of names that would disappoint and shake the Swedish society to the core. Because, you know, like if you start to publicize the real men who are guilty, who did this, then this would shake the trust towards the police of Sweden in general. But I don't think this actually justifies it, because like a murder has been committed and the killers have to be punished. Also, many people believe that once you would start digging deeper, you would go into like representatives of Secret Service and really important high-ranked people, and nobody wants to risk touching those people, if you know what I mean. Besides, if you watched my MS Estonia video, the previous one, then you know that Swedes are pretty good with their secret services and sweeping things under the rug with like secret seal. Like nobody will never know this is top secret. So this might be just like part of how they operate in general with their secret missions. And as we know, like in most cases, when the police hasn't done a proper job, the journalists pick up the story, but nobody actually also decided to dig into this crime. Why? Well, because the sole information that they get about crimes, the journalists, they get from the police, because they are dealing with the crime. So this was like a silent agreement between the police and the journalists, that the journalists would never criticize the police, and in turn they would give the information. So the official like national media, they didn't dig deeper because they had connections with the police. And what is more, even the politicians didn't want to show any initiative in this case. They didn't ask the questions. They didn't want to dig deeper this case. That was until the year 1995, when there was one politician who was a minister of finance. His name was Olof Palme, who started to show some interest into Olof Palme's shooting. He came out with this announcement that he believes that there is a possible police's role into the death of Olof Palme, and he created an official inquiry to look into the police in relation to this case. This inquiry, of course, didn't get any official response. However, there was something else that happened afterwards. On the following night, when this announcement by this Minister of Finance happened, two men were spotted on the rooftop of the Prime Minister of that time. His name was Ingvar Carlsson, and those men were walking on the roof right above where the Prime Minister's bedroom was. Now, what you have to know is that after Palme's death, a Secret Service was assigned as like bodyguards to the Prime Ministers, because like they felt now they need to do that because like Prime Ministers have become very vulnerable. And it is so funny to know that none of the secret services reported that there are two men on the roof above Prime Minister's house on that night. This message about those men on the roof was sent out by some like private security guys who were working like across the street. So the police arrives, they arrest both of those guys who were walking on the roof of the Prime Minister's house. And afterwards, an announcement is made that this was by no means anything political. There was no suspicious activities. These guys didn't meant anything bad. But the logic question remains, where was the Secret Service who was supposed to protect the Prime Minister in the moment when two random guys were walking on the roof of the Prime Minister? And in my opinion, I don't really believe that both of these guys did it just for fun. And if you think this is weird, it gets even crazier. So, 6 hours pass, and the Prime Minister Carlsson, he calls for an emergency press conference. And in that press conference, he announces his resignation due to personal reasons. Yes. So, just to like recall first, the Minister of Finance makes this inquiry to investigate the police in relation to Palme's murder. Then, on the night, two shady men are spotted on Prime Minister's roof. and Secret Service who are supposed to protect him suddenly become blind and don't see them. And then this same prime minister comes out and announces that he's resigning. I don't think this is a coincidence. What is more, Carlson was in such a rush to announce his resignation that he did not even have time to name his successor. And his deputy learned about this only a couple of minutes before this press conference started. After Carlson resigned, a new prime minister came into force. However, despite the fact that he was also social democrat, he was not even close to that of Olof Palme in his actions, thoughts, and everything that he was doing. Don't come after me and don't stand on the roof of my house, but I'm just gonna tell what I'm feeling and I have a right to express my opinion. It seems like somebody who was regulating all of this mess was eliminating prime ministers up to the moment until they found that one prime minister who can be bent in a way that is beneficial for them, if you know what I mean. There was indeed a special commission created afterwards who had to investigate the police in relation to this case. And in the year 1999, they came out with this official report where it was said that they didn't find any links between police and Olof Palme's death. And of course, they didn't consider any of the testimonies of the witnesses, any of the documents, and any of the things that we discussed in this video previously. Yeah, and this commission, it took them years to come out with this report. Again, just stretching the time. And also a side note, all of the documents that were given to this commission to look into were handpicked by the police. So basically, you are investigated and you're also choosing what kind of documents you are showing. Ridiculous. The report afterwards stays in the walls of the Ministry of Justice and nobody is trying to pick up the case again. Year 2011 was the year when legally all the inquiries must stop. In between, in the year 2003, another popular Swedish politician, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, was stabbed to death. Related or not, I don't know. Seems like indeed there was something like a mafia there that operates with these politicians and influential people. So, back to the fact, did they find anyone whom they used as a scapegoat at least? Well, we have to mention at least two men in relation to that. So on May 28th, year 1986, there was a man named Christer Pettersson. He was a petty criminal with some drug addiction, with some criminal past, and he was allegedly cross-examined on the first night of the murder, and then the police got suspicious and tapped his phone afterwards. In December of the year 1988, he was brought in again for some questioning, and this is the moment when Olof Palme's wife, Lisbeth Palme, actually recognizes him through video as the man who shot her husband. Mind you, we also have to take into consideration the fact that that's a woman who witnessed her husband being shot in front of her eyes. So what she remembers might not be so clear. She was in a high stress situation, and I don't really think that she had so much time to look into his face. And yes, there were some witnesses who said that allegedly they spotted this Pettersson in the area where Palme was at around 11 p.m. on the evening on that night, but that was nothing substantial. Even if he was spotted there, it doesn't mean anything. You need to have some kind of solid evidence. So far, it seemed that Palme's wife's saying that that guy was the guy is the only thing that links him to the case. So Pettersson also didn't have a solid alibi. He was coming home. That was confirmed by his roommate and stuff. So he didn't have a solid alibi. That was also a little bit shady, but there is more. So the prosecutors had trouble finding a reason for Patterson to kill Palme, because he was very far from the politics. He was no extremist. He was in fact not even interested in the politics, and he was not following it. And he didn't really have any motive to kill. In the district court, Patterson declared his admiration for Palme as Sweden's only statesman. Also, he did not have any experience with guns, and records showed he never had any weapons during his life. In the judgment of 27 July, year 1989, the district court sentenced Patterson to life imprisonment for murder of Olof Palme. The verdict was appealed in September of 1989, and the Court of Appeal acquitted Patterson. The Court of Appeal pointed out that no witnesses other than Lisbeth Palme could point out to Patterson at the crime scene. There was also a lack of technical evidence like gunpowder residue, murder weapon, and the investigation could not prove that Patterson had a motive to murder Olof Palme. Lisbeth Palme's memory of the fleeing perpetrator was questioned, as she must have been upset and with her attention focused on her husband. In year 1997, again, a new request to reopen the case in regards Patterson and Olof Palme's death was made, since new witnesses suddenly appeared saying that they saw him in that area where Olof Palme was killed. However, this request was rejected, and in the year 2004, Patterson died. Now, as for me, of course, he could be the guy, and he also could be like paid to do that. But I mean, we remember all the story that we remember that I told you, like, it doesn't look like this guy. It really looks like they found some kind of junkie with a criminal past who was in that area during that time and decided that they should probably put this on him. That's my opinion. I don't know, how are you thinking about this? Now, I also wanted to mention another man who had become like a scapegoat in this case. It's just so funny, so I have to mention. So at first, this man, his name was Stig Engström. He appeared in the headlines thanks to like Swedish prosecutors who suddenly came out in the year 2020, so quite recently, by saying that this is the guy, we have solved the case, okay? But at first, like this guy, this Stig Engström, sorry for pronunciation, he was brought in at the beginning of the case as an eyewitness, and he was not even considered as being one of the possible killers. So years pass, and in the year 2020, they finally come out and say that this is the guy. According to the prosecutors, the suspicion was so strong that it would have given grounds for detention. As Ekström was dead at that moment of announcement, he could not be prosecuted, and the case was dropped. The funny thing is that the public investigation that was presented in the year 1999 contained nothing about the police's decisions in regards to Engström. Although in the year 2020, the public prosecutor's office spoke critically of this part of the investigation. Like, they don't mention him in the report, but afterwards they say that he was one of the critical suspects and he is the one who did this. Do you feel like the tendency here, as I said at first, they blame it on some lone junkie criminal who was in that area, they failed, and now they blame it to a person who's literally dead. This is how they want to close this case, okay? And at the end, we have this man who was like people's man, one of the most probably loved prime ministers of Sweden. He was shot to death and nothing really is done about this. So I will put my full stop here. It was a really interesting investigation. I really love these like controversial topics. It's just so sad that I have to end this with like loose ends. So let me know your opinions about this case. How do you think, was the police involved? My opinion is that yes, because there's certainly a lot of signs of it. And let me know if you've heard about this case. And yeah, I have some news, hopefully. Hopefully, next time when we're gonna meet for another video for my channel, I'm not gonna have this boring background, because I am slowly working towards a new place for filming my videos. So hopefully it's gonna happen. It's gonna take some time, so maybe not next time, but the time after that. But I'm really hoping it's gonna be next time, and I'm totally excited for that. That being said, all of your support, including financial, would be very beneficial because, you know, also repairs and creating new place for my videos cost some money. So if you want to support me, here's my Patreon. I would be very happy if you would support me with anything. And this is not really obligatory. If you just want to support me like that, drop me a message in the comment section. Make sure you have subscribed, share this video with anyone who would be interested into knowing my stories. And yeah, see you next time. Have a nice day. Hopefully it's sunny. It's actually quite sunny today in Bergen, although it's autumn and usually it's raining. Have a good day. Bye.